Welcome back to the Journeyman Podcast, everyone. We are on episode 36, and today we're going to be diving deep into the concept of transparency, specifically from a vice president. We all know how important it is to have leaders we can trust, but how much do we really know about what goes on behind the scenes in government? And how does a VP's communication style affect our understanding? Stick with us to find out, and if you're enjoying the show, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives like this.
Yeah, it's a very timely topic, especially in today's information age. There's so much noise out there, and it can be hard to separate fact from fiction.
Exactly. So to really explore this, we're going to be focusing on a recent press briefing by Vice President Vance at the U.S. Mexico border. You can find the link to the full video in the description below. But before we get too far, I'd also recommend checking out the Forbes Breaking News YouTube channel. They do some great work covering current events.
Definitely a valuable resource for anyone looking to stay informed.
Okay, so back to the briefing. This took place shortly after President Trump's State of the Union address, and Vance was joined by some pretty heavy hitters. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. The fact that they chose the Texas border as a location was a pretty clear signal, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It immediately sets the stage and suggests that border security is a top priority for this administration. Having the Secretary of Defense and the DNI present underscores that this isn't just about immigration. It's being framed as a national security issue.
And they wasted no time in drawing a stark contrast between the Trump and Biden administrations on border policy.
Right from the start, they painted a very critical picture of the situation under Biden, using terms like border crisis and highlighting issues like increased crime, fentanyl deaths, and what they call unchecked illegal immigration.
Vance even went as far as saying, and I quote, "Joe Biden opened up the American southern border and allowed the cartels to turn it into their playground."
It's powerful rhetoric designed to resonate with those who are already concerned about border security. By creating this image of chaos and danger, they're setting the stage for their own policies to be seen as the solution.
And speaking of solutions, they spent a lot of time emphasizing what they claim are successes under the Trump administration, particularly when it comes to reducing illegal border crossings. In fact, Vance mentioned that at one specific location, crossings dropped from 1,500 to just 30 per day.
That's a dramatic statistic, and they attribute it directly to Trump's leadership and policies. It's interesting how they use this specific example to suggest a broader trend, even though the situation at the border is incredibly complex and varies greatly from location to location.
And it's not just about numbers. They also talked a lot about empowering Border Patrol agents, arguing that they were held back under the previous administration and are now finally able to do their jobs effectively thanks to Trump.
It's a clever way to frame the narrative. They're appealing to the respect many have for law enforcement while also deflecting any potential criticism by placing the blame for past failures on the previous administration, not the Border Patrol agents themselves.
It's interesting how they blurred the lines between border security and national security.
That's where the presence of Hegseth and Gabbard becomes particularly significant. By having them speak, they're sending the message that this isn't just about immigration policy, it's about protecting the nation from serious threats.
And Gabbard even brought up a pretty chilling example, saying that over 4,000 individuals crossed the border using an ISIS-affiliated network during the Biden administration.
That's a claim designed to heighten the sense of danger and urgency. By connecting the border to terrorism, they're tapping into deeply ingrained fears and making a case for a more aggressive approach.
They also talked a lot about the growing threat posed by cartels, claiming these organizations are becoming increasingly sophisticated, even comparing them to Islamist terrorists.
That comparison is quite striking, and it represents a significant shift in how the administration is framing the issue. It moves cartels from being seen primarily as criminal organizations to being viewed as enemies who potentially require a military response. This has serious implications for U.S. foreign policy, especially when it comes to Mexico.
Speaking of which, they didn't shy away from hinting at potential military action if Mexico doesn't cooperate on border security and crack down on fentanyl production.
That's right. Vance suggested that if Mexico doesn't take the issue seriously, the U.S. may have to figure out what to do from there, which certainly sounds like a veiled threat, even if he stopped short of explicitly mentioning military intervention.
And it seems they're willing to use economic leverage to get their way, with tariffs being presented as a way to pressure Mexico into taking action.
Tariffs can be a powerful tool, but they also come with risks. They can damage economic relations and potentially hurt businesses and consumers on both sides of the border.
Okay, let's pause here for a moment. We've covered a lot of ground already, but we've only just scratched the surface of this briefing.
We'll be back in just a moment with more of the Journeyman podcast.
So we're back, and, we left off talking about the pretty strong rhetoric coming from the Trump administration, specifically about how they view the situation at the border.
Yeah, they definitely didn't mince words.
Yeah.
And one of the key themes that emerged was this focus on mass deportations as a way to address what they see as this rampant illegal immigration.
Right. Vance talked about making it easier for people to self-deport, but he also stressed that they would be stepping up enforcement of immigration laws and, removing those who are in the country illegally.
And this is really, in line with the administration's broader efforts to restrict immigration, both legal and illegal. They've implemented a number of policies aimed at deterring people from coming to the U.S. and making it more difficult for those who are already here to stay.
And they kept using this phrase, gutted immigration enforcement regime, to describe the situation they inherited from the Biden administration.
Right. It's that kind of language that's designed to create a sense of urgency and justify their actions. By painting this picture of a broken system that's been neglected by their predecessors, they're setting the stage for their own policies to be seen as necessary and even heroic.
And of course, we can't talk about border security without mentioning the wall.
Yeah, the border wall has really become like a symbol of the Trump administration's approach to immigration. They see it as this vital component of their border security strategy, and they're determined to complete it.
Vance reiterated their commitment to finishing the wall, and he also highlighted the role of technology in border security.
They talked a lot about using AI-powered surveillance systems, drones, and other advanced tools to monitor the border and track movement.
It seems like they're trying to create this high-tech border that's virtually impenetrable.
That's definitely the impression they're giving. They want to project this image of strength and control using technology to enhance their ability to enforce their policies.
But all this raises some important questions about the potential costs and consequences of these policies.
Exactly. While they focus on the immediate goals of deterring immigration and securing the border, they don't really address the potential long-term impacts on the economy, foreign relations, or human rights.
For example, mass deportations could have a huge impact on families and communities.
Absolutely. Separating families and uprooting people from their lives can have devastating consequences, both for the individuals involved and for society as a whole.
And the construction of the wall has already faced legal challenges and raised environmental concerns.
Yeah, the wall cuts through these sensitive ecosystems and disrupts wildlife migration patterns. And there are questions about its effectiveness in actually deterring illegal crossings.
And then there's the issue of using tariffs as leverage against Mexico.
Right, that's a risky strategy that could backfire. Tariffs often hurt businesses and consumers on both sides of the border, and they can damage diplomatic relations.
It seems like they're willing to take a very aggressive approach, but they're not fully acknowledging the potential downsides.
That's a key point.
Right.
They're presenting this very one-sided view of the situation, emphasizing the threats and the need for action, while downplaying the complexities and potential consequences.
It's important for us as citizens to look beyond the rhetoric and consider the full picture.
Absolutely. We need to ask these tough questions about the costs and benefits of these policies, and we need to hold our leaders accountable for their decisions.
This briefing really highlights the challenges of balancing security with other important values, like compassion, fairness, and respect for human rights.
It's a delicate balance, and one that requires careful consideration and nuanced solutions.
This has been a really insightful discussion so far. And we're back with part 3 of our deep dive into Vice President Vance's press briefing on border security. One of the things that really stood out to me from the briefing was this whole idea of framing cartels as, like terrorist organizations.
Yeah, that was really striking, and I think it raises a lot of questions about, how we view these groups and what kind of tools we might use to deal with them.
So what are the implications of that? I mean, if we start thinking of cartels as terrorists, does that open the door to military action?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could. I think by labeling them as terrorists, the administration is sending a signal that they're willing to consider a much broader range of options, including military force.
And that could, lead to an escalation of violence in the region. I mean, it's a pretty slippery slope.
Absolutely. I think it's important to really think through the potential consequences of that kind of approach. I mean, is it really warranted?
Yeah.
Or could it actually make things worse?
And they also talked about, designating Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, or FTOs.
Okay.
What does that even mean?
Well, it's a legal designation that gives the U.S. government a lot of power. It allows them to impose sanctions, freeze assets, and even target individuals associated with these groups.
But doesn't that also raise questions about, like sovereignty? I mean, Mexico is a sovereign nation.
Right, and they've already expressed concerns about this proposal. They see it as a violation of their national sovereignty, and they worry that it could undermine cooperation on border security.
And then there's the whole issue of fentanyl trafficking, which was a big part of the briefing.
Hmm.
They seem to be blaming Mexico for a lot of the fentanyl that's coming into the U.S.
Yeah, they're putting a lot of pressure on Mexico to crack down on production and trafficking, and they're even threatening to take unilateral action if they don't see progress.
Vance even hinted at the possibility of, like, U.S. forces going into Mexico.
Yeah, that was a pretty provocative statement, and it raises some serious concerns about, the potential for conflict.
I mean, Mexico's not going to just sit back and let us invade their country.
Right. This whole thing really highlights how complicated the relationship is between the U.S. and Mexico when it comes to border security.
We need to cooperate, but it seems like the administration's rhetoric is kind of pushing us further apart.
Yeah, I think that's a real danger. They're so focused on projecting strength and taking this tough stance, but they don't seem to be thinking about the long-term consequences of their actions.
So what's the takeaway here? I mean, what should people be thinking about after listening to this deep dive?
I think it's really important to remember that border security is a complex issue. There are no easy solutions, and I think we need to be careful about these simplistic narratives that just pit us against them. We need to be having a more nuanced conversation about this.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Journeyman Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives, and we'll see you next time.